Hi everyone, welcome. I'm India Hextall, a policy analyst at the National Skills Coalition, and thank you for joining the Improving Job Quality and Strengthening Social Safety Net breakout session today. I hope that you are enjoying the Skills for California Summit so far. We are delighted to have you here. So that we can all have a sense of who is in the virtual room, can you please in the chat state your name, organization, and what you hope to get out of this session? Today's session will be interactive. There will be a facilitated discussion, which includes taking questions from our wonderful audience, along with a whiteboard activity. So if folks in the chat can please state your name, organization, and what you hope to get out of the session in the chat room with us so that we can all have a sense of who's here today with us. Awesome. Thank you, Alyssa, for joining. And we hope to talk today about how we can all work together in making and creating quality jobs for California workers, especially workers of color. Yes, Burr, we will definitely hit on immigrant students in this session as well, too. And Andrew, I see your comment about learning best practices for workforce equity and inclusion. That will also be touched on in this session as well. All right, well, thank you everyone for taking time to introduce yourself in the chat today. And please continue to share any questions, comments, and resources in the chat throughout today's session. So let's hop right into it. Workers across California have the right to good family supporting jobs that pay a living wage. They have a right to access to benefits such as healthcare, retirement, paid sick leave, and paid family leave, and jobs that provide safe and healthy working conditions that comply with all workplace laws. However, historically, people of color and women are concentrated in low-wage jobs that often have unhealthy or dangerous working conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic put a spotlight on low-wage workers and essential workers who played a vital role in driving California's economy. In today's session, participants will discuss how to ensure greater fairness and opportunity for workers earning low wages, reducing wage theft, and ensuring access to rights and benefits afforded in current law, providing affordable housing for workers, and supporting worker safety net. I'm delighted to be joined by an esteemed panel. Maureen Conway will serve as the moderator for the session. She is currently the Vice President at the Aspen Institute and Executive Director of the Institute's Economic Opportunities Program. Maureen founded EOP's Workforce Strategies Initiative and has headed up workforce research at Aspen since 1999. She oversees the Economic Opportunities Program's leadership development programs, which connect innovators both within communities and from across the country to peers working to help low and moderate income Americans access opportunity. Thank you, Maureen, for joining us today. And also joining us is Peter Calstrom, who serves as president and CEO of the San Diego Workforce Partnership. He has led nonprofit organizations in the San Diego region for more than 30 years, including services to people with disabilities, homelessness, and underrepresented job seekers. He joined the San Diego Workforce Partnership as CEO in 2012, and with a diverse budget from multiple sources and investors, the San Diego Workforce Partnership funds, oversees, and delivers workforce programs to empower job seekers to meet the needs of regional employers. We also have Cesar Lara, Director of Programs and Policy at MILPA and Executive Director of the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council. MILPA's purpose is to cultivate change makers for the next 7 generations by improving the health and well-being of the most impacted communities. They provide innovative and culturally relevant approaches that support resident civic engagement and support work to end mass incarcerations. They use healing-informed, relationship-centered approaches to incubate next-generation leadership and infrastructure while striving for racial and social justice. They also work with local and state and national institutions through trainings, technical assistance, and the establishment of best practices. And last but not least, we have Lola Smallwood Cuevas, who serves as project director at the UCLA Labor Center. Lola's work focuses on exploring the role of unions, empowering African-American workers in Los Angeles, and strengthening the position of the Black working class. She founded the LA Black Worker Center, a project of the UCLA Labor Center, and the first worker center in California focused on solving the Black job crisis. Thank you, Lola, Maureen, Peter, and Cesar for joining us today. We are looking forward to the conversation. And now we'll turn it over to Maureen to get us started. Maureen, take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, India, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm excited to be here today. And what I'm going to do is try to share my screen and provide some opening framing about why we've been focused on job quality at the Aspen Institute's Economic Opportunities Program. And then we'll go to our moderated discussion. So hopefully I have done the technology appropriately, and if not, hopefully someone will let me know. So just to start, so why job quality? And I think India was just touching on some of these things. We've learned, particularly in the pandemic, a good job is good for your health and is good for public health. Certainly, with the amount of time you spend at work, their job quality is one of the important determinants of health. Good jobs are good for families and communities. Child poverty is a function of parents' income. Good jobs are essential to equity, as has been noted. I heard in the introductions today. And good jobs are good business and good for the economy, right? So if we want people to really sort of bring their best selves to work, they need a reason to do that. They need a decent job. And the way our economy functions relies on people being able to support themselves through their work. Why is it important? And just sort of on that last point, I do want to note that I realize that this session is also about proving job quality and also strengthening the safety net for workers. But I think we should continue to sort of ask ourselves, why do people who work need a safety net? Why is their work not able to support them itself? And I think we need to continue to sort of keep that question in mind and think about how do we design good jobs so that workers aren't relying on a social safety net and are earning a dignified living that they deserve. And workforce development, I think we can sort of see that a singular focus on skills isn't working. Educational attainment is up, wages have been stagnant and low, and low wage jobs are a growing part of the labor market. This isn't to say that education and skills training isn't important. Obviously, it's very important, but it's not sufficient in itself to help everybody get to a good job. We also have to look at the systems and structures, power dynamics that create so much low wage work and how those can be addressed. Job quality is a choice. It's a choice shaped by social norms, business models and trends, policy, incentives, regulatory. There's a lot of levers that we can choose to use to improve job quality. And we have to start to have a narrative in our heads where we say, job quality is something that human beings choose. Human beings shape work. Work is a human institution. So it's not the case that it's preordained that childcare jobs must be terrible jobs. That doesn't have to be the case. That's what we choose to be the case, and we can make a different choice. And finally, I would just say this is something I feel like I've been bedeviled by my career, working first primarily with sector strategies, which always talked about systems change, which in many ways was about improving job quality. You can't get to a scale of success if we're trying to get people into living wage work without job quality improvements, because you just can't get everybody into living wage work if there isn't enough living wage work to go around. And particularly at this time, it is important to remember essential workers are essential workers because they do essential work and their jobs aren't going away anytime soon. There are those who will sort of make technology arguments that maybe robots will take over, but so far those aren't really playing out. So I think it's really critical to think about how do we, what are the various levers we have to improve job quality. And here's just sort of, I've been doing these kinds of analyses in a variety of different labor markets. This is the most recent one I did with Detroit with 2019 labor market data. And just to sort of look at for different households, what, and by major occupational category, how well do those occupations in those major occupational groups support those kinds of households, right? So using MIT living wage data for the Detroit metropolitan area, there's the green is above a living wage for 1 adult and 1 child. The living wage for 2 adults and 2 children is based on sort of 2 adults in a household, both who work full time. If they each earn $33,779, then together they make up what that household would need to meet a basic standard of living. And then there's a living wage for 1 adult with no children, so just 1 adult able to support themselves independently. And then there are some jobs, notably in food prep and serving, that are below even that standard in terms of the median wage. So the size of the box corresponds to the number of people who work in that occupational category. And then printed in the box is the number of jobs and the median earnings for occupations in that category, just to clarify what this is. And so what you can see is that, you know, certainly the purple and the black box are not what you would think of as family supporting jobs. The blue boxes is a pretty tough go, and the green boxes are where we're trying to get everybody into. And it's really hard to get everybody into this little box, this line at the top, right? So we have to think about how, particularly for the black and the purple jobs, how can we start to make more of those jobs living wage jobs? Job quality, of course, is more than wages. There's many dimensions to job quality, and that means there's many things that we can work on to improve job quality. In addition to pay, there's schedules and ability to sort of manage your time in a predictable way, in a way that can work with the rest of your life. There's benefits, obviously, particularly in the US context. So many of our benefits come through employment. There's a variety of things around working conditions, whether work is safe, whether you have healthy working conditions, but also to be free from harassment and discrimination. So there's a lot of those kinds of issues. And then, you know, I think there's a really important piece around agency and respect that we need to think about. And I've seen different workforce organizations and different organizations work on different elements of these, engage employers in different ways, look at sort of what is the company practices, do supervisory training. There are things that we can do to think about these different dimensions of job quality, how important they are to the constituents we work with, and how they can be improved. So the good news is there's always room for improvement. And we recently at the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program developed a job quality tools library. Here is sort of a stylized little map of our job quality tools library, to provide some resources for people to take a look at and see how can I address different elements of job quality. So there's different sections on understanding job quality, assessing job quality, thinking about how to talk to businesses around job quality. And then there's sort of our stacks section here, which has the different elements of job quality and organizing tools that pertain to those different elements, from wages to worker voice. And then, of course, it's really important to think about how do we, and this is often a challenge, but how do we measure success? And how do we communicate that? How do we think about capturing improvements in job quality? A lot of times these are more difficult to capture than sort of individual outcomes, right? Because if you're looking for a job quality improvement that a company takes, a lot of times there are many influences to make that improvement. So so that can be challenging, but you want to get a sense of at least what are you looking for, and how do you capture that? So that's kind of my quick opening, really just to sort of underscore the importance of thinking about job quality in our work, and also just to underscore there's lots of different avenues for action. So I'm really excited to be with you all today, and to talk with you more about these avenues for action. And I'm very excited to talk with this wonderful panel about all the things that they're doing, because they're an amazing group. And so that is my quick little go around. And now I get to ask them a lot of tough questions. I'm really glad that India did all the introductions, so I don't have to remember all of that. And I get to call everybody only by their first name, which really limits my ability to screw up saying people's names. So, so Peter, let's just jump in, and I will start with you. Because we've done work together in the past, and you've done a lot of work at the San Diego Workforce Partnership in advancing a job quality framework and thinking about what it would take to achieve job quality. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Well, you do realize, Maureen, you took all my talking points. I don't know what else to add. That was an amazing overview. And thanks to you, Maureen, and what you're doing at Aspen, you've really helped shape for us how we can deploy that in our region, because job quality is a tough concept for many to embrace, because it's controversial in many cases, and especially in the workforce development space when we have two customers, the worker and the employer, and how do you balance that without causing more angst when you're trying to advance the benefit for both. But we embrace it fully. It really underpins in the end all that we do. It's reshaped our strategic focus, and with that, then we have to figure out how to deploy that in a meaningful way so that we can help the employers to embrace it. Because if they can, then we can really advance this work. If they push back on it and don't get it, or have their conclusions already made up that this is just a pro-worker thing, then we lose. So a lot of it is education, number one, to let them inform the employer that this is a win for them when done right. And especially in this time we're in economically, where it's an employee time for getting into the workforce. There's many who are not getting back in yet due to the health risk, and the health risk is also directly related to job quality. If they don't feel safe at work, if they don't feel appropriately rewarded for their time, sweat, equity, then they're not going back. And we have employers in our region paying pretty high hiring bonuses just to come back. So this is an opportune time for us as a workforce development entity for our region to be able to inform employers that the better job quality you have, the better chance you're going to have of attracting and keeping the very best workforce. And when they see it from that lens, then this is a big win. This is really a new opportunity for us to be able to do that for them. So we're trying to maximize this opportunity, but we've also done a lot of homework, thanks to you, Maureen and Aspen, and developing a lot of literature, tools, framework that we've shared with our counterparts across the state and the country on how to develop a job quality framework and make it really meaningful, and advance other articles that speak to things like stable scheduling and how that's a benefit to both, not a pro-worker, anti-employer initiative. And then it's our job, again, to just do this ongoing education so that it's embraced and not a resistance, not an automatic pushback that this is some sort of leftist agenda that is not good for employers. It is. It's great for employers when they really understand it. And lastly, I would say the more we can educate our elected officials who have that bully pulpit to really share this more broadly, get the language into the vernacular for employers, then for them, they're going to be competing at a new level around how to do this well, build up their own workforce. When they do that, they win. And if we can really translate that for them, then again, this is an opportune time.
Great, great. So I have to say, just one thing that you said to me was like just now was, that they see this as just a pro worker thing, and that should that be so terrible to be pro worker? I mean, do they really want to advertise themselves? Come work for me. I'm anti-worker.
It's a funny dynamic. In our region, we're made up of what we call the three traded sectors, the really big movers. We have the military, we have the innovation sector. So we have a lot of life sciences, bio, and high tech. And then we have a huge swath that is the hospitality and service sector. So each one of them make up around 200,000 jobs in our region. And so there's a huge competition for labor. And in the hospitality, social services, we know it's really tough because the wages are lower, the conditions are riskier health-wise right now. And the mobility for them to move into other positions is really hampered for life reasons. But it's that huge swath there where there's great competition. And fortunately, because of that competition, the wages are going up, but not enough around the other job quality principles of benefits and scheduling and childcare and other supports have been elevated. But it's beginning to. But it's our job, again, as a workforce agency, not to be stuck in transactional, just get that next job mode and trying to hit some WIOA outcomes, but rather how do we re-envision what it is we're here to do and how we can benefit both with job quality principles that will help the employer, will not be an anti-employer thing. But we run into that all the time. When we put out our stable scheduling paper a couple months ago, we did it with the input of employers, but not all employers were engaged because it's a big community. And there was a knee-jerk reaction on the part of a number of them where they thought this was harming employers who are already doing the very best they can. But the point was they can do it better, and we can help them do it better. And when we put in place something like a stable scheduling format, you're going to be able to encourage and support the women workforce that has been greatly impacted during the pandemic, and they'll win because of that. But if they go into it with a negative outlook that this is some other agenda that's not pro-business, we have to overcome that. When we do, then we can have a good conversation.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm going to come back to you in a little bit and ask you a question about what workforce boards can, how to. I feel like there's a challenge within this job quality work of how do you kind of get credit for it within the workforce system, and how do you think about outcomes? So I'm going to come back to you with that because I bet a lot of people are trying to figure that out. But Lola, I want to come to you so you can talk to us a little bit about your work at the UCLA Labor Center and really on addressing the Black jobs crisis and strengthening the position of Black workers in Los Angeles, and just strategies for strengthening the position of Black workers in general. It'd be great to hear that.
Thanks so much, and really appreciate the presentations, Peter, that you just made. I am coming from the UCLA Labor Center, and we work primarily with workers, really centering the needs, the aspirations, the blue sky, right, that workers have set for themselves, and to build power and worker leadership to develop strategies and solutions that help workers define their future in work and in the workplace. My current project, the Center for the Advancement of Racial Equity at Work, is focused on Black workers and thinking about ways to really build at the community level spaces where workers can come together, analyze the sectors that they're in or the sectors that they want to be in, and to understand what the barriers are and really what are the bottom-up solutions that they see to be able to address their ability to access those sectors or to improve or transform those sectors. And in our minds, that's really, how you create equity, because equity is about workers having the tools to be successful in the future and vision that they see for themselves, right? And so if we work back from that, workers hold a lot of the solutions, right, to the challenges and the problems that they see. My work, as India mentioned, is one of the co-founders of the LA Black Workers Center, and I'm really honored to be here representing the Southern California Black Worker Hub for Regional Organizing that is building worker centers in San Diego, in the Inland Empire, Los Angeles, and I was speaking earlier about some conversations with some folks who are in the Central Valley, really trying to think about, a new approach that centers worker in a historic crisis that Black workers are in. And I want to say that, part of our analysis and the research that we've been doing, and a study that we did about 2 years ago that showed 2/3 of new jobs being created in a place like LA County were low-wage jobs, right, for workers. And that Black workers and immigrant workers were holding about 65%, right, of those jobs. And, for that as our reality, right, really, as Maureen says, it's not about how do we fix the worker deficit, right? Our thinking in terms of the worker center network is how do we address the systems deficits and the overlapping barriers that make it really hard for workers to get access to quality jobs. And we think one of the primary tools for that, right, is unionization. It is worker voice. It is creating, and institutionalizing spaces where workers have some say over their wages and working conditions. And as I said, solutions, right, to the problems that they seek. And for Black workers, this is critically important, in California in the last year. And I'm just going to share my screen because I want folks to just get a little bit of context for where we are in this moment. And, right now, Black workers in the last year have filed 85% of all Blacking age adults in California have filed for some form of unemployment insurance in the state as a result of COVID. When we look at Black workers without a high school diploma, about 98% of those folks filed for unemployment and remain on those rolls. And so when we think about, the historic context of Black work and the jobs crisis, where Black workers have always been unemployed at double the rate of white workers, in a place like LA County with such a robust and diverse economy, we have about 50%, right, of Black working age adults either with no job or working poor. And from our perspective at CARE and our perspective in the Black Worker Center movement, there is just way too much at stake for us to look at low wage jobs as an option. Like, we really have to focus our attention on job quality. We really have to focus our attention on institutionalized ways for workers to have a seat at the table and some voice over their wages and working conditions. And we can't expect the individual worker to go into a low wage work and be able to transform it, right? I think the data showed since 1970, employers and management have had a 500% increase in wages, and the workers' wages have been flat, right, since the 1970s. And cost of living, earning so much less. So I say that as the context for really lifting up the need for workforce development, for worker centers, for community-based organizations to really see the idea of high road training partnerships and ways to connect marginalized and disadvantaged communities with sectors that offer careers that sustain families. I also really appreciated what Maureen said about we can't go back to normal, right? So COVID has shifted the ground underneath us, and we can't go back to a normal situation, particularly for Black workers, because the situation was so dire. And for folks like, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Did I stop sharing? Okay, great. And for folks, particularly women in the economy who were have had the largest job loss after COVID, and who were primarily the reason why the job loss was so steep for Black women is because they were in sectors that were already unstable and low wage, right? So their jobs did not come back. And if they did come back, employers were picking and choosing who could come back, right? And so, you know, I think that one of the things that we see as a solution to one, the precarious work and the marginalization of workers is what are the ways that we can do create opportunities for high road training partnerships, as I mentioned earlier. And this has been an approach that worker centers have been using, where we have, created relationships within, unionized sectors, such as, the building trade, such as the public sector, such as, home care, for example, where we're trying to raise the standards there. And how do we build a bridge between workers in our communities and those unions? Part of it is educating workers on what it means to have a union. And union is really a partnership, right? It's a joint management partnership. It's where workers and employers come together and think about, how do we make strong industry? How do we keep these jobs strong? How do we keep our industry growing? And workers really adding to, what are the trainings that we need in this sector as it's changing? Because they're in the work, they're in the job. Union members understand the shifts and changes in their industry and what are the skills that they need to be relevant and to grow and to be promoted in that industry. And I think if we think about workforce development with that perspective, right? Creating those partnerships that allow workers to grow and upskill and give input, we have the opportunity to really transform the lives of workers and sectors. I think about one of our members of the Black Worker Center. Her name was Ladea Johnson, and Ladea was an unemployed single mom, right? And we were able to connect her with the laborers union. She went into a very difficult construction trade training program and testing program, and she was able, with the support of a community partnership that the Black Worker Center provided, including mentorship, including prepping her for the training that she needed to overcome in order to get into the union, including introducing her to all of the levels of the trade and having her see that this was a career opportunity and preparing her for being a woman and a Black woman in that sector. We were able to have her go into that training, rock it out, maximize it, do well, and make it to the journey level, right? And now she's studying to be, sort of a training officer within that trade, right? Looking at her trajectory. But if we did not have a good union, right, that provided those training opportunities and upward mobility, if we didn't have community partnership to mentor her and support her through that opportunity, she would not have been as successful as she was. And I think that that's one of the things that we've come, to understand, that when you have the right partnerships, both employers, unions, and community-based organizations, Black workers tend to do well in those opportunities. And the numbers bear it out, that when Black workers have access to these kinds of unionized opportunities, they earn about 40% more than Black workers who are in non-union positions. They have the opportunity to promote 3 years faster in a sector than workers, Black workers in non-union opportunities. And they also have a 77% chance of having housing security and medical benefits and retirement benefits. So, the union partnership is a proven partnership that has worked for Black workers. And Black workers have fought to be in unions for over 100 years. And I think that we as a workforce development system have to see that this is a strategy that is a win-win, right? It's a win for employers to have trained workers, to have conditions that reduce turnover, and for workers to have access and an opportunity to promote a career that they can sustain and to support themselves. And I will just close by saying that, Black workers have that unique experience in this economy of having to work through racial capitalism, right? To be at the intersection of race and capital. And unions also provide that collective bargaining agreement, a legal binding agreement that defines, right, what they earn, right? So the wage discrimination that you see, the discrimination that can exist in the hiring. When we have these kinds of partnerships that bring community and union in our workforce boards and professionals together, right, we begin to chip away at some of the discrimination that keeps workers, right, out of these opportunities, right? We have the opportunity to create tools that bring those workers in and create equity for them, right? Those supportive tools that they need to be successful. And so I'm really excited for this conversation and to hear from folks, you know, on the call on this call today, to really think about, you know, how do we look at these kinds of partnerships and really target them for workers like Black workers who have these overlapping barriers. We know that we can do it. We know that we have done it in the past. And you know, this moment of COVID presents an opportunity for us to try something different because so much is at stake.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Lola. That was really great. And I have several things in my mind, but I think I'm gonna come back to you and sort of ask you a little bit more about these partnerships and particularly painting that win-win picture. I think, you know, one of the things that struck me in some of my conversations with some of the folks in the California Future Work Commission was how little awareness they had of how many people in California are working and yet still poor. And just sort of, and particularly people who are sort of more on the employer side of things, right? And even in other conversations with employers, they are surprised to find out that it's their workers that are getting public benefits, what they would call welfare, right? So, and so I think we really need to think about how do we have those conversations to really shine a light on that and have these and engage them in partnerships to really build a dignified world of work. But Cesar, coming to you now, and excited to talk to you. I know that you do a lot of work in particular, thinking about sort of what are the particular barriers that immigrants and formerly incarcerated people face and in the labor market. And just in general, I'm hoping you can tell us a little bit about the programming that you're doing to ensure that people don't just get any job, but get good jobs. So maybe you can talk to us about that.
No, thank you for the opportunity for being here. And I kind of want to take the, get the baton handed back to me by Lola, because of the challenges that we're facing in my area, Monterey, Santa Cruz, San Benito County, are really the challenges that rural California is facing. And so, I had the opportunity to have a couple jobs, because you can't just have one job. For the last, 13 years, I've been the director of the Monterey Bay Central Labor Council. And just a year ago, I took the extra challenge and also became the policy programs director for MILPA, which is an organization that was started by formerly incarcerated individuals. And I saw the world kind of come together, because less than 10 years ago, the AFL-CIO said it finally had a position to take a position to say mass incarceration is bad, and that the incarceration system in the United States is the new Jim Crow, where it really has held communities down. And so in Monterey County, we have two state prisons, and we've seen incarceration really affect our community, and we have to kind of take the layers off the onion and to kind of really look at it and say, it's a lot of trauma in our community, and a lot of that is around good jobs. Father Boyle in East LA at Homeboys Industry says the best way to stop a bullet is with the job. And he later on changed it up and said with a good job, because, there is good jobs and there is bad jobs. And, and the other factor that we have in Monterey County is the issue around immigration. So Monterey County per capita has the highest percentage of undocumented individuals, more than any other community in California. So that means that we're a border county, and in a state that has the highest number of immigrants in the United States. So we're at ground zero. So in my community, we have two segments of the population, and sometimes people wearing multiple scarlet letters. One is the label of formerly incarcerated. And our society has really, held that up to individuals. If somebody has done something, they go into the prison system. And in California, we've been trying to reshape the prison system to be a space for healing, because at the end, we can't repeat the mistakes of the past. And so, making sure that they address their trauma and are healed up to a point where they can come back into society, but they carry that scarlet letter with them at all times. And immigration is the same way. If you came to the United States because you were an economic refugee from another country, in my community, the highest percentage is for Mexico, you wear that scarlet letter as well, because finding employment is not easy. And people gravitate to Monterey County because 65% of all jobs, so that's almost 7 out of 10 workers work in either hospitality and agriculture. So that means that you have a lot of housekeepers and a lot of farm workers. Average salary of a farm worker is still $28,000 a year. And we also live in one of the highest highest cost living areas in the United States. And so you have a lot of overcrowdedness, a lot of issues of trauma, a lot of issues around not being able to be at home with your child to really help them along. And what happens with that? You have the school to prison pipeline that gets overlaid on that, or for some people in our community, the school to deportation pipeline. And so as we kind of look at the programming that MILPA does and the Monterey Bay Center Labor Council does, we kind of want to highlight that and want to make sure that we address those traumas, those inequities, those racial inequities in our community that have really brought us forward. And we do have an opportunity. There is the new normal. There's the post-COVID. And the definition of what an essential worker is has really shined a bigger light on what does it mean to really have a good job. Because, COVID spread in my community the most, it wasn't because of worksite issues, farm workers working out there. It was because of their living conditions, because they couldn't afford to live and have the space to really be in isolation. You had multiple families living in one household because that's all they could afford. And because somebody was formerly incarcerated, they couldn't get the good jobs. And so, all those issues need to be addressed. And we have this opportunity because the definition of essential workers has really shined the light, but hopefully it also shines the light of the inequality. And so comprehensive immigration reform needs to be addressed. And Biden is talking about it, but I think as a community, we need to look at it as not an issue of whether or not, somebody has broken a law, which it's a misdemeanor to cross from one country to the other, but some people consider it a high crime, and look at it as an economic development opportunity. Or the issues around banning the box, making sure that people that have been formerly incarcerated, at least for workforce related issues, have that letter taken off of them because they've done their time. Society says you did something wrong, you go to jail, you do your time, and what happens to them? It follows them for the rest of their lives. And we can't do that as a society. So with the new normal, post-COVID, we really need to fix the sins of the past and really look in the mirror and say that, we have issues of race that need to be addressed. Last month on the 26th was the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And so, while we were in isolation, we also had to address the issues of race. And so I don't have all the answers, but I know that at least the first thing you have to do, and you do it in the 12-step process, is you have to acknowledge that you have a problem. And as a society, we have a problem. We have a problem with race. We have a problem with treating people in a different way. And at the same time, we have this whole debate and this whole argument about those people that you've been treating that way are now considered the most essential part of the workforce system. And we need to invest in that community because there's a difference between equality and equity. And equity means that you have to go and invest in the communities that have been disinvested, and I would say for generations. So those are the formerly incarcerated population, and those are the immigrant population. Because if you take a step back, those were the ones in the essential services. And so now we have to live to the dream that, Cesar Chavez said. He wants to treat farm workers like professionals. So if you're a professional, you get professional wages and professional benefits. That's not what's been happening. The buying power of farm workers have gone down since 1980. Dramatically, their wages have not kept up with inflation, and they are also living in conditions that are not well because they make very little money. So, and same thing goes for the formerly incarcerated. They are barred. They could have the best system. It wasn't until last year that Governor Newsom signed a law that said that those people in the incarceration system that were trained to be firefighters, that fought firsthand in the fires across California, because in California we have a 5th season. We have summer, fall, winter, and spring, and we have the fire season. That it wasn't until last year that Governor Newsom said, if you have that training and you're formerly incarcerated, you could actually go and become a professional firefighter. It wasn't until last year, after thousands of people, some of them have died fighting in the front lines of the fires, were allowed to even get into that profession. And so that was a big symbolic step, but it was huge. And those are the issues that we need to address and look at ourselves in the mirror to really address that the issues of workforce are an issues of race and class. And we need to find those good jobs. Like Father Ball, the best way to stop a bullet is with a good job. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Cesar. I really appreciate all of that. And I just particularly appreciate you saying we really have to address the sins of the past. I think too often we try to frame this conversation in sort of very like sterile economic terms and and show the ROI of everything and sort of receive that business framing. But I think there are the sins of the past that absolutely need to be addressed, right? And so, so I really appreciate you raising that in particular. I think of, sort of the 7 deadly sins, and greed is one of the 7 deadly sins, and we just don't talk about it enough, but it's been a real problem. So thank you for that. I see we have some questions in the chat. And so I wanted to go to one, which was on getting employers to come to the table sort of voluntarily rather than by mandate. And I'm going to ask both Peter and Lola to think about that with us, sort of how that can work. And I don't know which one of you would like to start. Peter, you buzzed in first.
I'm reminded of that acronym, the WIFM, what's in it for me. If there's something in it for the employer, they will. We have to use the carrot and the stick. I do wish that they would all come willingly and openly. I mean, it's a very slow, progressive way to really engage the employers. And that's one of the charges of the workforce system. We all do it in different ways and have more or less capacity based upon the scale of the operation we run and whether you even do direct employer engagement. So there's a lot of factors that go into how well we can engage our employers. I do believe, though, again, it comes back to the basics of educating them around job quality as a benefit to them. And when we can spell that out in clear, simple, easy terms, make them the champions of it, then they're going to bring their colleagues instead of us having to knock down their door. They can kick down each other's door and get them to realize that there's a big WIFM if they do it. And that's a process. I mean, the language of job quality is still relatively new. I mean, we were all trying to do it without the language and the framework that Maureen and team have helped put out there for us to embrace and advance. And now that it's there, it's still just the beginning of the education with the employers that job quality is for them. And then we have to show them the benefits and how this is going to build their own workforce and strengthen their own business. Not to say employers are greedy, but they've got to pay attention to their bottom line. They've got to be viable. They've got to have the best benefit for their investment in all that they do. And when we can show that this really sets them apart from their competitors, then they'll come to the table. But it's on us to be able to really spell that out for them and let them know.
Lola?
Yeah, I was, as you were speaking, Peter, I thought about the word power, and I think that we do need to ensure workers have power to shape job creation policy. And there's the carrot and the stick. And I think one of the things that we have seen and why we think it's so important for workforce development practitioners and community-based organizations to connect and unions to connect is that we have to be about building policies that rights the wrongs of the last 30 years in which corporations were able to move forward and leave workers behind, where the shareholders became the most important part of business versus the workers, right? And I think it was in my, probably 1 or 2 generations ago where that was the case. I think about the factories on Central Avenue, and I think about the relationship of those Black workers to those factory owners, right? So it's not that we haven't been there before. I think we just have to use our policy tools as a vehicle of really bringing those elements of our communities, right? Because business is a part of our community, workers are our community. How do we bring them together to develop those strategies that work? I think about targeted local hire policies, right? I think about community benefits agreements. I think about, the ways in which unions have really looked at what are the needs of the owners in terms of how to be able to make investment in their workforce and for that to be retained and to last and to grow with the company, right? And it's a very unique position, right, that workers have when they're in a union to be able to have that kind of an economic development analysis and strategy that can be put on the table. And so I think the more spaces that we create for those kinds of collaborations and discussions and reminding us of who we really are as a business community, where we began when we talked about the greatest society was in, holding all of us accountable, right, to a quality of life in this country. And I think, another piece that I've seen that there's been this positive goodwill around Black Lives Matter, around corporate voices stepping forward and recognizing the original sin, right, of how this globalized economy began and how the, profit and unwaged workforce, right, motivations, right, we still are reforming that system. That system is still being reformed. And, how do we turn that positive attitude and change into actual job creation with those 250 firms that made this commitment, right? I think we have to drive the strategies and we have to create the opportunities. And that's why workers really have to be organized, right? Workers have to be an organized force in the equation of really transforming the economy and holding employers accountable, right, to the community.
I just want to echo those great comments, Lola. It's having organized labor being valued. Again, we have that now in the Biden administration and the new Department of Labor, and that's an exciting time. So we really have to maximize this time and opportunity instead of fighting against it as we did for the past 4 years. So it's a great opportunity to really advance more equity. And one other note, though, I would add that where workforce development boards can be beneficial in this is that by law through WIOA, our boards are prescribed with how they're made up, which also involves at least 15% labor. And that's great because then when we get private sector and labor at the table on a regular basis to actually talk about this, and then what we bring up for conversation so that they see themselves as colleagues, not as competition, is a great opportunity. And we have to do a great job of that in the workforce development space to really knit that together so that they work collaboratively on things. And then they see organized labor as a great value. And not enough of that is seen because of the inherent conflict that has happened and grown over time. And then lastly, I'd add to some of your earlier comments, Lola, the workforce, the makeup of our workforce boards is really critical, and we have to be diverse. And if we're not, if it's just a reflection of who that board chair is or the CEO, then we're missing a great opportunity for people of color and different backgrounds to be at the table, because then the conversation begins with who's at the table instead of trying to get others to the table. So I'm really proud in our case where we've diversified a great deal in the time I've been with it. And for the first time just recently, it's amazing to have to even say this, but for the first time, we're now a women-led majority board for the first time in 47 years of existence. Thankfully, we're there. It should have happened a long time ago, but and also with diversity of background and BIPOC, then we're a better board. But if we don't do that intentionally, then it's not going to be reflected in the work.
Great. Thank you. I see we have some other questions in the chat, and I do want to get to them. There's one about childcare specifically, and then, but then thinking about workers who are in smaller establishments or maybe independent workers that don't have these same opportunities to organize. How do we think about what are some solutions for them? And this might also be a time to think about what are some policy ideas you are thinking about, because I think too often we only think about organizing within the context of one business, but our policies make a huge difference in terms of the structure of work and the incentives for companies to build good jobs. And so organizing around policy change is also an important avenue for organizing workers. But let me open it up to you all about your thoughts for workers who are childcare workers, specifically if you have thoughts, or just workers who are in smaller establishments.
I would just say there's a tremendous amount of childcare worker organizing happening right now. United Domestic Workers just had a phenomenal victory bringing in childcare providers across the state to raise standards. And, we talked about the steepest job loss amongst Black women, and part of it was they just didn't have anyone to care for their children. They can't get back to work, to the job that they had. And so, and I think that's kind of leads to the second point about this question about infrastructure investments and what kind of infrastructure investments and what kind of policies that we need to sort of define what real infrastructure is. For families, it's childcare. That is an infrastructure need. And so I think, as we're thinking about infrastructure and building partnerships around careers and quality work, what kinds of partnerships could be built with childcare providers that help to provide some skilling, promotion, and training opportunities, allows for more providers to come into those jobs and to really create the childcare safety net that the majority women workforce need to be able to be successful in that work. And I just think that, as Peter is saying, having the right folks at the table is critically important. I want to say community-based organizations and worker centers are not part of the Workforce Development Board formula, and they really should be. I think that the crisis in our communities, I talked about the unemployment and underemployment for Black workers, fueling disproportionate homelessness, fueling disproportionate health disparities, fueling, disproportionate violence in communities and incarceration. Like, we've got to bring those folks who are nearest to those barriers to the workforce table, because those are the barriers of work, right? Those public policy failures, right, have created this crisis in work. And so therefore we need to bring some of that strategy to our workforce development table, and not just as subject matter experts, but really in the partnership with unions and employers to figure this out, right? Because it is systems change, right? And practice change. And we have to do that, together.
Yeah, thank you, Lola. That's really great. And on this point of childcare, I appreciate you bringing up National Domestic Workers Alliance. They've been doing great work. On this point, I also just want to note, like, the childcare system, this is one where that intersectionality of sort of advocating for policy change and sort of working with providers and others on system issues is really critical, because how do we pay for childcare? It's parents and young parents, right? So, when you have your children, typically you're also early in your working life and you don't make a lot of money. And so there's just not enough money in the system unless you get public money put in the system. I mean, you can't make childcare good jobs based on what young working parents can afford to pay, given what jobs pay at this point, right? So we really need to think about sort of intersecting those. And I think in particular for workforce development that sometimes focuses on skills and sort of how do I train people to be good childcare providers, there is just no point in training people to be good childcare providers unless you're also going to be engaging with coalitions that advocate for better investment in childcare systems. Because unless you do, the people you train to go into childcare, they can't be their best childcare providers because their lives are too unstable. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to leave childcare. It's just a silly way to think about that investment. So we really need to think about a very multidimensional strategy for industries like that really do require policy change.
Well, and if I could add onto that, I think it's to acknowledge that we have a child care crisis in California, and to say that the level of investment that needs to happen there is so crucial, and it's a way of economic development in our community if we invest in the child care system, investing with good paying jobs. Because I think for so often, the childcare industry has been not focused on by government, and if you look at it as an economic engine, on its own industry, but also how supportive it is for the whole family and for the whole community. If we don't have a good childcare system, we're underinvesting in our economic development in any region that we live in. And you're right, Maureen. Government needs to spend more time in making sure that segment of the economy is strong, because it's gonna help all the other industries around California. With farm worker jobs being so big in my area, it's mothers and fathers needing to figure out childcare and really leading down the road. If you don't invest in good childcare and then underinvest in schools, and then we have the school to prison pipeline problem. It starts at a foundational level, and also making sure that you respect the workers that are doing the work to have the professional wages and the professional benefits. And for that, government needs to step in and help out. Because like your earlier question, Maureen, is that we need to really peel the onion layers off and really look at the root problems. And childcare is one of the root problems in our economic development infrastructure in California.
Great. I know India has a plan for something to do with the technology that I can't manage. So I was just going to go to one sort of last lightning round of questions to give everybody sort of a final say. So I'm going to add a little bit to this question, but I still want you to answer it quickly. So in a perfect world, what would job quality look like to you? And what's one thing that you recommend people either stop or start doing to improve job quality? All right, who's going to buzz in first, or do I have to call it? Okay, Peter.
I'll go. You asked just the easiest questions, Maureen. What would it look like when key employers are using the language that we embrace and being the leaders on it or in concert with us? Then we're there to support their initiative, which can lead to lifting up all workers and providing equity. So we have to educate, get it into their lingos, show them that with them. And when they do, and they really can get their arms around it, and you get the chambers who back it and the EDCs that truly back it, and it goes beyond lip service to real action. And our elected officials, of course, and in our case, we've shifted to a very progressive mayor and county board of supervisors. So they're more accessible to get that to them. So again, our job is to do the hard work, to get that in their lingo, to show them there's a benefit to all. And we have to be really urgent about it. We can't let up. We can't just leave it at the workforce board meeting. We have to make a lot of noise. We've got to be activists about this because in our echo chamber, which is important for us to really hash out the thoughts, we got to take it beyond and we got to really embed it in the work. So that for me is when it's going to be real. What was the second part of that question?
One thing that people should either stop or start doing to improve job quality.
Start or stop. I could just
Or
speak
you
for
can
the
just
work.
say one thing you've stopped or started doing.
Well, in the workforce development space, we have to make it very visible that we care about this. Get it on our websites, get it in our newsletters, repeat and repeat. You can't say it enough, and you got to show again the mutual benefit to this. But if it's embedded, buried down in your website where only the staff can find it, you're wasting your time. Get it out front and make it real. Learn and evolve. Maureen, you've been an amazing resource. It helps us think about it, shape it, make it our own. And we got to get it out there. We got to live it. We can't just talk about it amongst friends and be done. It's got to shape it. So we've got to own it. We got to make it happen.
Great. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Cesar?
Yeah, and the thing I want to add to it is I think we're in an opportunity point in history, and I think we're gonna, if we don't do anything about it now, in history we're gonna look back to this period of time as we lost this great opportunity, and we really need a new great new deal, and how we need to not just look at the way government is spending their money. So much money is spent on incarceration. In my city, the city of Salinas is the largest city between San Jose and Ventura. It's an economic engine. 45% of the city budget goes to police. 45%. Almost 50% of the budget goes to police as streets are falling apart, as parks are not being maintained at the level, as our libraries are not being maintained. So there's a little bit of budget priorities that we need to do. And I use the city as an example, but you could apply that to a county and to the whole state. And so we need to look at it that way. Where does government invest their money? And secondly, is we need to look at the business sector. I think the one thing that we learned, and we're seeing that in hospitality, or in the restaurant industry, where workers are not coming back. They're saying, I spent the last year in isolation. I had time to reflect, and the job that I have is not paying us enough, and I'm not being respected in the workplace. And maybe I'm just reading into it, but employers in those two industries are hurting for workers. And the one thing that they need to acknowledge is they need to pay them more, and they need to give them more benefits. The union employers are not having the same level of problems than non-union employers. And so we have to kind of look at the regulation to make sure that we invest in good jobs. And then to the workforce development board opportunities. It wasn't that long ago in Santa Cruz County, I was arguing with my board members saying, no, you should not spend $100,000 to train people how to use a cash register so they could get minimum wage jobs. We need to have a real conversation around high road jobs and making sure that training is available for all the populations that need it, issue of equity, but for just everybody. The workforce system needs to make sure that we're uplifting the good jobs. And so as we kind of look at this opportunity and time, we need to really put pressure on government, but we also need to put pressure on the private sector to look at the new normal, and look at some of the essential workers are not going back to the workforce because they're not being respected. Let's call it for what it is, and hospitality, agriculture, we have the same problem. And at the end, it's about putting more on the table. If being a farm worker is a profession, pay them professional wages and professional benefits. Because, sometimes if I get paid very well, and I have to balance life and everything. And I will sacrifice for my family, but if you're not getting paid much at all, and you're not getting any benefits, and then they want you to go back, you're going to take a step back and be, we need to do things differently. And I'm hoping that government could help the private industry to kind of figure out what the new normal looks like. And we have to do it in partnership as a community.
Okay. Lola?
Well, my vision is let's bury the trickle down theories. Let's put them in the ground and create a thrive theory. How do we center an economy with workers, and particularly marginalized workers? If we lift Black workers, we will lift every worker in this country. We lift marginalized workers, we will lift every worker. And I think if we go back to the theory that when the worker does well, right, that's an economic development strategy in which that money gets circulated within our communities, within our country, and helps us build the global power, right, that we need, a safer at home approach. So, I don't want to go, bring in the Keynesian theories of economy, but I do think, this isn't new. And to your point, Cesar, it's the New Deal, right? We're going back to what works. And given the future of work, which I hope we could say the thriving of the future of work versus just the future, because the future is very bleak as we're moving to a gig and automated, economy. If we aren't able to come up with some radical and deep, bold strategies, we will see this COVID moment as, wow, those were the good days, right? So I think there's so much more that we need to do. And that starts with what do we need to stop? Let's not invest any workforce development money into bad jobs. Like, let's just not put money into that. Let's put our very scarce resources that the working people have contributed to us. Let's use those dollars and put them in high growth career trajectories. And let's build around that. Let's not, focus resources, allocate our resources in jobs that perpetuate poverty and exacerbate the challenges that we're facing. So I would say, we have tech, we have gig. These could be great jobs, right? But we have to make them that way. We have to design them that way. And that means we can't spend money, putting folks into retail jobs, like in our workforce development system. We've got to put all of our money into creating those career opportunities. So I would say radically, let's just stop investing in those jobs that are not going to move us forward. Let's figure out how to make the jobs that folks are in better. And let's try to figure out how to build career pathway and bridges into those jobs so that we have a thriving economy.
I love it. Let's stop accepting low-wage work, and let's start defining success not by fixing the deficits of workers, but by fixing the deficits at work. Excellent. India, I think I get to turn it over to you now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Maureen, for facilitating fulfilling conversation. And thank you, Lola, Peter, and Cesar for being panelists for this session. And now we want to move towards an interactive activity with everyone, where in just a few moments, I'm going to share a whiteboard with everyone. Okay. So you should see a whiteboard on your screen. And if you move your cursor to the top of the screen, you should see a little box that says click view options. And then from there, you click annotate, and you can use the text feature in another box that pops up. And what we're going to ask is that folks use the text feature to answer this question. And the question is, what is one idea you have for the workforce community to help increase job quality and place more people in quality jobs? I'll add the questions at the top of the whiteboard for folks too. So I'll give folks a few moments to add their responses to the whiteboard. And again, to get to the text feature, you go to move your cursor to the top of your screen, and you should see like a little drop-down box, and click View Options, and then click Annotate. And then another box will pop up, and text will be one of the options for you to click there. So I'll give folks a few moments. And as you place your answers or responses on the whiteboard, I'll be moving them around and bucketing the responses into different themes. And I welcome any of the panelists to provide any sort of additional insights or comments around what folks are sharing.
Sweetie, it's too late. I mean, this meeting's going to be over in a minute.
Yeah, I just wanted to lift up on the career pathways. There's an initiative at the Labor Center, the Workforce Equity Initiative that SSR and I are part of, and it really is about transforming how the workforce development system invests its dollars and moving away from low quality jobs. So I really appreciate the point about workforce areas that we need to stop posting and advertising and focusing in low quality jobs and invest in high quality, high road jobs. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I appreciate the challenges of engaging small businesses in particular. And I know that in many communities, small businesses, provide a lot of important sort of community benefits, and they're an important opportunity for many people to build a decent livelihood. And so I know that there's this tension of like, sort of how do we help small businesses, but at the same time, sort of encourage small businesses to be able to provide quality jobs. And I think that, this is something we're starting to do a lot of work on in terms of how do you support small businesses, but still help them build business models around good jobs, so that it's not sort of that we're trading off entrepreneurs against their workers, but we're trying to find strategies to help them succeed together. So we're continuing to do work on that, and I just wanted to lift that up.
On that note, Maureen, too, another thing we've been doing in the past year, especially, is around helping small businesses with ESOPs, employee ownership setups, and that's been well received. And we've done that in collaboration with our EDC in particular. And we're a community of something like 98% small business, 100 employees or less. So San Diego's thought of differently, but the great majority is small business. And so helping employers with ESOPs has actually been well received, because many employers do want to do what's right. And if they're given the opportunity to set it up and it's a win-win, then it's something we're going to be diving into more and more. And that's all about worker agency and more to come.
Yeah, and also part of it too is policy-wise, we need to help the small businesses that are really going after some of the higher, like the gig economy industries. For example, the restaurant industry in the last year, because of the closures, have relied on Grubhub and Uber Eats and all those kind of gig jobs, and it's the workers picking up the food that get paid very little. and it's the restaurants that have to give a high percentage of the profit to those companies in a percentage that really makes a difference between making ends meet or not. And they've been victimized by those app companies, and so it's really addressing that is a major industry, especially around the restaurants and that industry really need a support from government to really step in and say, it's greedy for a company to do that, and how can we really help the small businesses by addressing some of the bigger kind of, I don't even want to call them employers because they're not really employers. They're just middlemen, taking their cut and making billions and paying the workers very little and taking a big cut of the percentage of the restaurants, for example.
Also, as WIOA is getting potentially reauthorized, maybe not this year, but next, there's a lot of work on the language. And if it can be embedded in there, then that really empowers the workforce development system to be able to lean into this in really tangible ways and not have that funky tension with those WIOA outcome measures that we have to hit, which can be antithetical to job quality.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to mention, I don't know how many people are familiar with this, and there's this bill in California, AB 1192, I thought was really interesting, called Uplifting Employers That Advance Job Quality Act. And it was really to sort of have more disclosure, at least among large employers, of the high road employer and have a high road employer certification system, but have disclosure about job quality. And I think it's really interesting because one of the things I noticed when I work with people is that they really struggle to find the information, like what is the quality of job an employer has, right? So, and we think about it in terms of industries, like this industry has good jobs and this industry has bad jobs. But within industries, you can find there's very, very different practices among different employers in terms of how good their jobs are or are not, and what they do. So anyway, I just wanted to raise that because I know you're going to be hearing from Ash Kalra, and that's the person who put the bill forward in the first place. And I just think it's an interesting strategy for starting to try to help provide more information, because I see both in terms of job quality work, both a struggle, particularly for workforce systems, in the level and the detail of information that's available, as well as Peter was talking about, the kind of outcomes people are being driven towards and not being driven towards. And so to do a good job on picking new outcomes, though, you have to have some transparency in your data. So just sharing on that.
No, if I could add on to that, because being on the workforce development board in my community, labor market information is important, but I also want to take this opportunity to really highlight on a possible bill that Lola inspired us to do is let's say for every training money or every workforce development system money, at minimum, if it's a job that doesn't pay at least 25% above minimum wage, you shouldn't invest in it. And making sure that the workforce system really changes the way that they do things, to make sure that you support those high wage and high road jobs, and at least putting your foot down and saying, okay, if there's a training opportunity or a job that you're training workers for, if it doesn't pay at least 25% above the minimum wage, maybe you shouldn't be funding it. And really putting your foot down, because being on my workforce board for the last 10 years, we always get these monthly reports. We say, oh yeah, we help these people, and on average this person is getting paid this amount, and you're like, that's just a dollar above the minimum wage or even at minimum wage, and we spend thousands of dollars to help them get trained. Was that an investment that we should have done as a workforce system? And my answer is no, as part of being that 15% that Peter said on the labor front. But because 50% of my board is employers, they're saying, Caesar, let's move on, and we need to put our foot down on it.
Yeah, but I also think there's something to think about in terms of and again, I'm thinking about work we've been doing with smaller businesses, is not necessarily training people for their jobs, but are there other things that you can do when you have a company that wants to work with you to say, well, this is why your jobs aren't really up to our standard, but maybe here's some ways we can help you think through how you can start to build a business that's going to support better jobs. And then we can work with you in terms of training people for those jobs. But we're not training for them as they are, but as they could be. That, you know, that's a possibility, but maybe there's something else we can work on together to start with. That's another way some places can go.
No, it's true. ETP funds are a good opportunity, you know, to work with employers and maybe investing in that to really, you know, help workers go to the next level. And because employers, one of the biggest things is retention of workers. And if you're not going to provide a training opportunity for a worker at a certain level to get trained to be at you know, at a higher level, it's not a, you know, it needs to be invested in more. Like one employer in our area, I brought in ESL classes, learned and taught, you know, farm workers and packing shed workers to learn English. And we built it into collective bargaining agreement is that if they did a pre-test and a post-test and showed growth, they would get a $1 an hour raise. And we got that funded by ETP funds and by local foundations funds funding that program. And, you know, we had like 300 workers learn English at a level where it got them an hour per hour raise. And that's an example of thinking outside the box, working with employers paying the workers to be in a classroom to learn a skill, and they were able to have workers be at a higher level and, you know, learn the safety, you know, regulations and everything in English when their native language is Spanish, but also show them how to file a grievance as well, which is always a good way to do it too.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, thank you to our lovely panelists, Laura, Cesar, Peter, and Maureen. And next, we will have about a 10-minute break. And we ask that everyone come back to the platform to join us for closing remarks at 12:40, where you will hear highlights from the other breakout sessions that occurred today and learn more about what we have in store for you tomorrow. So thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a wonderful discussion on job quality. I will be sure to share any resources that folks mentioned in the chat with you via email after the summit. And we will see you all later at 12:40. And again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.